Day 263 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine today. And as always, I'll start off with the Russian losses. So as of the 13th of November 22, so in the last 24-hour reporting period, there has been an additional 650 Russian military personnel losses there. So nearly at the 81,000 mark in total. Then when we look at the hardware losses, so armored combat vehicles, 12 losses there, tanks 2, and artillery, an additional 8 losses for the Russian forces. Then we'll move back to the map and we'll start out as we sometimes do recently in the recently liberated northern bank Kherson region, where there has truly been a tremendous amount of updates coming out of here. And not the least of which is from historic scenes of joy for liberated citizens in Kherson, free from the tyranny of Moscow. And on this point, due to the recently liberated Kherson North Bank, Ukraine has now liberated over 50% of areas captured after February 24th by the Russian forces. So that's pretty incredible, halfway there. And Ukraine is certainly coming back for the rest of it, including the remainder of the Donbass and Crimea as well. Now, the celebrations in Kherson continue well into day 3, and pay attention to this video here. And I want you to, because the Russian propagandist trolls are really out in full force at the moment all over the web, trying to say that civilians in this region are only small groups of 20 to 30, they're paid actors, they're pretending to show their enthusiasm for liberation, but nothing could be further from the truth. So that's why it's videos like these that are in particular much harder to reject or ignore, as we see the recently liberated Ukrainian Kherson locals celebrating in a march as far as the eye can see. But apart from the online Russian trolls waging their propaganda war, the actual Russian forces in this region are also doing something of the same, including shelling. So the Russian forces are shelling the occupied village of Hornostavka. So there it is, just on the south side of the Dnieper River. Now obviously this is Russian occupied, and it's a method of trying to pressure the local residents out of here into so-called evacuation. Oh, and also in this very region, we also have some reports of Russian forces themselves fleeing from Kakhovka. So this is right here, pretty close, but not exactly the same as Nova Kakhovka. So yesterday we had reports, in fact, of Russians fleeing from this location. So they really seem to be not enjoying this area. Having said that, of course, they are really more centrally located, the Russian forces, on the south side of the river. So they've got multiple lines of trenches defense that they've set up between Kherson and Nova Kakhovka. But I have the feeling that the Ukrainian forces will break those defensive lines sooner rather than later. Oh, and moving on to what the Ukrainian forces are doing in this general region here. So Ukraine has placed multiple pinpoint strikes on the occupied Chaplinka airfield today, which was just spoken about yesterday. How I said Russia was starting to move helicopters and things of that nature out of here. You see, Russia needs their airfields, but this one is well within the range of Ukrainian fire now, causing the Russian forces to have to move their aircrafts even further back now, because it's simply untenable for Russia to continue to keep their aircrafts in this whole region any longer. In fact, due to the Ukrainian army now pulling up a front seat just north of the Dnieper River, Ukrainian firepower is now in range of no less than about 14 airfields in this whole region. Some much smaller than the others, but I'll give you another example, in fact. So I'll need to zoom in and find it, but here it is right here. So Skadovsk. So there's really fresh reports of explosions here in Skadovsk. And so when we zoom in, there is another within HIMARS range airfield. There we go. So that's really the new Ukrainian strategy. As like I say, they've pulled up a front seat to the river, so they are within pinpoint strike or accuracy of many further locations. Oh, and speaking of which, remember this road here. So the M17 that connects Kherson to the Crimean Peninsula, which is actually a very critical point of entry for the Russian forces, for logistics as well, coming from Crimea for about 50 to 100 miles. There is no other access point on the Crimean Peninsula except if you go to the very east there. So this M17 highway here, probably at this choke point, maybe around Stavki in fact, is likely to get hit extremely hard by the Ukrainian side shortly, which obviously will put quite the hamper on a Russian defensive or offensive efforts. Now, in terms of Ukrainian cleanups in the recently liberated North Bank, as indicated by the blue there, Russian soldiers are continuing to be captured in Kherson City, usually in civilian clothes, but not always. Many more are still hiding and the search continues. Some sources say up to 2,000, but only time will really tell. And apparently the remainder of these Russian forces are hiding, so in some basements, some are in the shipping district. So as a result of all of this, the Ukrainian forces are setting up a temporary 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. curfew to snuff out these guys. And these Russian troops that were rudely left behind, might I add, by their very own country, they're unlikely to fight but rather surrender, as many already have. Some say just follow the trail of washing machines, but a simple conversation with these pretenders is actually surprisingly effective of a method to snuff them out. For instance, the Ukrainian armed forces will just simply ask them things like, can you tell me your name? Where are you from? What's your address? Why is your accent funny? Or should I say, why is your accent Russian? And why are your words in broken Ukrainian form? And it just sounds a bit strange. I suppose broken Ukrainian, what I'm trying to say is like, the term broken English. So unless these Russian soldiers are highly trained sleeper agents that can't actually, if they, apart from not being that, they can't actually lie their way out of this line of questioning because they're just simple mobilized conscripts that have barely had a day of training. And then we'll take a look at some of the captured Russian hardware in this region in the last day or so that I've found. And so the first one appears to be yet another chopper, so the Mi-24 variant. This one is actually really fresh and recent news, so I'm waiting on more information regarding this one. It didn't actually show up in the choppers list for today. And then we have this fairly poor condition old BMP vehicle, which is an armored infantry fighting vehicle. And then after that, two 60-year-old Russian T-62 tanks with the copest of cope cages found in Davidbrid. And another BMP, this was a BMP-2. It was completely submerged and hidden in the lake, but now has been towed out. These vehicles are designed to be amphibious, so hopefully we can work something out for this one that was completely submerged, or at least use it for some spare parts. Oh, and my favorite captured hardware for the day. So a large warehouse of ammunition, which was left behind by the retreating Russian forces as well. So Ukraine is getting lots of arms supplies from all over the world, but they're still quite privy to one particular supplier. And then moving on, so various abandoned, mostly scrap metal was found there as well. Certainly can, in part at least, be used for replacement pieces. And there we go. So I'll move across to other places on the map. I don't want to focus all of the video on Kherson, but we'll start out next up in Sumy, where Russia targeted the Sumy Oblast with 15 unguided missiles today, No casualties were reported, just more indiscriminate, low accuracy fire again by the Russian forces. And remember, Russia holds no land here, so all of this was fired from over the other side, from their border side, the Russian Federation itself. Then we'll move across to the Donbass. So we'll start out in Crimea. So obviously fairly contested area that Ukraine is certainly on the offensive with at the moment. It is actually being heavily shelled by the Ukrainian forces as of today there as well. But also in this area, in fact a little bit north, the Ukrainian military liberated a total of 11 small settlements in the last day, which is pretty fantastic. This is in the Luhansk Oblast. So we are waiting for these map updates to see exactly which ones they were, but I suspect it was probably in the north here near the H26 highway. So this area that is somewhat grey or red there. Red indicating Russian occupied, grey indicating not yet confirmed, and green, in this case, indicating liberated more than 2 weeks ago. Now moving down a bit further, the AFU, so the Ukrainian Armed Forces, hit a concentration of enemy units in the area of Kursk. Now, that might sound familiar to you, Kursk, so there it is, right here. Russian occupied territory, obviously. And really, the location of Kursk is no stranger to being a Russian staging ground for soldiers, ammo dumps, supply lines, and command. And it's been struck a lot by the Ukrainian forces, even within the last few months. And yet, somehow, some why, the Russian forces seem to always forget this little but important fact. Then we'll move down a little bit. So the Ukrainian forces repelled frontal assaults all along the central Donbass line here again today. In fact, there was one tiny frontline settlement by the name of Yakovlivka, this one right here, where it appears Russia used their troops here to determine if there was a weak point to push through with. There was not. And herein lies much of the problem with the Russian forces, this trial and error cannon fodder approach. And I could really do a whole video on this topic talking about this, but Russia doesn't have many satellites for visual intel in this war, and arguably none of them are modern or high res. So instead they appear to take this really manual approach of testing front lines with conscripts. So literally using soldiers to test out or ascertain weak spots as if they're still in World War I or World War II. So it's pretty shocking stuff, really. So even though Russia has this amazing potential manpower force at their disposal, there's a lot of intel shortfalls for the Russian army, or what we might call technological disparity. Now, even if they did have additional satellites at their disposal, even more high-res, I doubt that they would even use them effectively to communicate that information in a timely manner on the front line to their conscripts that are just used as cannon fodder otherwise in this war at the moment. So communication is really key to success for almost anything in life, and the war battlefield is certainly no exception to that. But we'll move down the Donbass here and have a look at the next steps for the Ukrainian forces in the Donbass potentially, which is to drive a wedge, I'll zoom in a little bit here, drive a wedge between the east and the west right here. So the smallest point, about 80 kilometers or 45 miles, thus cutting off Russia's southern forces from its east and its west forces, which would be quite devastating there. Not to mention, really, either way, Ukraine will still continue to take out supply lines here. So you can see there's white, which is indicates the train lines there. So they'll continue to take out train lines and roads and anything that Russia would use to move both troops and equipment to the front lines. In fact, talking about this wedge here, cutting right through the center middle as we can see there, is in fact, Russia is quite scared of this Ukrainian play. So much so that they've installed those cheap concrete dragon's teeth right outside the city center of Mariupol. So Mariupol, a city that probably deserves to be liberated more than any other city right now because of what all of those poor citizens have had to deal with there early in the war regarding their war-torn city. And then just quickly moving across to, say, Zaporizhia, so on the Ukrainian-held side here. So where there was an exploded Iskander-K missile. Or sorry, I should say an unexploded Iskander-K missile containing cluster munitions that just failed to detonate in this region. And as a reminder, the Iskander-K missiles are one of Russia's most high-tech ballistic missile types, supposedly. They're very expensive, they're very few in numbers, and they've actually done this sort of thing before. Fizzled out a few times and just failed to work. In a few rare instances, just fell out of the sky. So what would be happening here is, like many other Russian weapon systems, funds that were allocated for research and development, but also acceptance testing, a very important piece of the puzzle, were instead misappropriated funds by the military contractors. But since those military contractors have to provide or show something for the funds received, they just provide some cheap knockoff of what they really should have provided in the first place. But hey, good for them, those oligarch contractors got a super yacht out of it. Then we'll move across to the Crimean Peninsula. So, a bit of news coming out of here. So this is good to see. So, in the occupied Simferopol city, in sort of central Crimea, there's a column of smoke has risen. We don't exactly know what has happened yet. It's quite recent news. Either Ivan or Sergei was smoking again near something they shouldn't have, or Ukraine was potentially using high-range ATACMS missiles that they don't officially have yet. But you know what? I've seen some amazing beyond HIMARS range hits in the last few months alone, so it's very interesting to speculate what could be doing these things so far away from the Ukrainian occupied, or should I say Ukrainian-held territory, or liberated territory, better word. Then we'll move across to some news for the day. So German Chancellor Scholz announced that the European foreign ministers are about to agree on additional sanctions against Iran due to Iran's recent supply of kamikaze drones to Russia that were used on Ukrainian targets over the past few months. They are expected to agree on this additional sanctions package in the next couple of days or so as well. Then in some other news, in Zelensky's most recent nightly address, he has confidently announced that Crimean citizens will greet Ukrainian soldiers with Ukrainian flags just like they did in Kherson over the past few days. Now, Zelensky and the majority of Ukrainians now support not giving up 1 inch of sovereign Ukrainian land, even if it means the war goes on longer. And in this next news piece, actually not really exactly news, but really recent footage from yesterday showing 9 Ukrainian HIMARS, high precision missile systems, and long range systems for that matter, lined up in Kherson. So this was on the 12th of the 11th, just yesterday. The footage is being uploaded now, but it doesn't endanger the actual systems themselves for OPSEC reasons, because they have since scurried away in pairs of 2 or 3 to different various locations around Kherson, likely. Now, Ukraine in total has 16 of these bad boys, with 18 more on the way still, so this accounts for a significant chunk of all Ukrainian HIMARS in just the one location, about 70% or so. Impressive stuff. And then just a bit of a quick funny to round it off today with, guys. So this is some stills of video. So Russian ultra-nationalist Solovyov is at it again on his talk show, his Russian talk show there. And in this video, he's really upset because of all the Russian propaganda that led him to believe Russia's army was so great and powerful and unstoppable. But the reason why I find this funny is because in the very next few sentences after saying that, he continues to spew on about that very same Russian propaganda philosophy, talking about the Russian goodwill gestures of leaving Kyiv and Kharkiv, Chernobyl, and all the rest. So this is what we call some truly serious mental cognitive dissonance. He's just so swept up in talking about the propaganda that he hated, and that he continues to spew it all out. So that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there, each and every one of you, in the next one. Cheers.